Hello and welcome to this live webinar with Tiza Mafira from an Indonesian activist and attorney working to stop the scourge of single-use disposable plastics in her country and in the world at large. I see that there's a handful of people tuning in, and we're really excited to bring this conversation to you. We'll be having about a 20-minute conversation with Tiza about some of the issues that she's working on, which we recently featured in our recent mini documentary called The Plastic Bag Diet. And we'll leave the last 10 minutes or so for questions. So feel free to type those into the chat as they come up, or you can save them to the end. And I hope they were able to get through them all. So without any further ado, I'd love to introduce Tiza. Tiza, why don't you get started by telling us just a bit about your background and your work today?
Sure, Brett. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. My background is in legal studies, actually. I used to be a lawyer. I used to be a corporate lawyer for 6 years before I decided to move over from the dark side and join the nonprofit. But that was simply because I had started, back when I was still at a law firm, I had started noticing and caring and being very concerned about the problem of plastic waste. And I started a petition asking for retailers not to provide plastic bags for free. And from then on, the petition seemed to tug at a lot of heartstrings because it gained popularity, and after it gained popularity, we handed it over to the government, the Ministry of Environment, and they were interested. So I thought, let me talk seriously with the Ministry of Environment, because if you're interested, then I can help you craft policies and procedures in order to make that happen if you're really interested. And so from then on, it kind of snowballed into a trial to charge for plastic bags for 3 months. And then one city started banning plastic bags. 2 cities started banning plastic bags. We're now at 3, and we're working with 5 other cities. And when I say working with 5 other cities, I mean we're actually in the office with them, in the room with them, talking about what a policy should look like, what it should cover, how to make it legally airtight, and how to make sure that people understand the policy enough to want to implement it effectively. So it's been a roller coaster 5 years. It's very exciting.
That's great. Well, that's really important work, Tiza, and you're certainly one of the change makers around the world that's leading the charge on this important issue. So we'll return and talk more about solutions in a moment, but let's back up for a second and talk about the problem itself. In terms of how we've shared that story with our community in our recent mini documentary featuring you, it begins at a place in Indonesia called the Ciliwung River, which I think I may be mispronouncing. But tell us a little bit about what we see in that video. And I certainly hope that folks have seen it. If not, I invite you to check out the Story of Stuff on Facebook or YouTube, where you can find that video featured. So tell us a bit about that scene. What are we seeing there, and how did it get so bad?
We're seeing a ride through Ciliwung on a boat, on a rubber boat. It's about a 30-minute ride. The river is much, much longer. And it's just one very short section of the river that's very close to the city center. Although it's close to the city center, city folks don't usually go there. It's not something, it's kind of like their backyard, but they don't really notice that it's there. And when we go there, what we see is that on both sides of the riverbed is full of plastic. And I'm saying it's 4 to 5 meters deep in plastic. And the plastic has become stratified and mixed with the soil. And it's basically it's a riverbed, but it's made of plastic. And the reason why that happens is because, plastic has been free, it's ubiquitous, but also because when people are being told you can't use plastic bags, or plastic bags are single use, some of them have this reaction that, wait, but we're not single using plastics, we're using plastic bags and then using it for trash. And so they put their trash in the plastic bags and then they throw it out. And then that either they throw it out directly into the rivers, or they actually have good intentions and they throw it to a place where they think is the proper place to throw it, but then it ends up in the river anyway. And it just exacerbates the problem. And this has been going on for decades.
That's a really alarming scene, and it really is starting to see just how much plastic is becoming a ubiquitous feature of the environment, although it's certainly not a natural feature of the environment all around the world. Not just litter sitting, on top of the dirt, but really becoming stratified with the soil, becoming a feature of the landscape. Now, there's something really special about plastic bags. We often say here that not all plastic is created equal. What is it about certain low-value plastics, like plastic bags or sachets, that make them a lot more likely to end up in the environment compared to something like PET bottles?
Yeah, this is very important to understand because we've been fed with this information for years and years that all plastics can be recycled, plastics can have value. Um, the truth is very far from that. So low value plastics could be recyclable, but they're not actually economically viable to be recycled, so nobody picks it up anyways. The thing with plastic bags and other types of low value plastics is that so they're too thin, so people say you can recycle them, but as long as they're a certain thickness, as long as they're clean enough or have been cleaned, as long as they that you manage to collect a mass amount that's enough to make it economically viable to be recycled. So there's a lot of ifs, there's a lot of as long as, and more often than not, these requirements are just not fulfilled. People use it to store trash, for example. If they use it to store trash, that automatically makes it dirty and unviable to be recycled. A lot of the plastic bags are just simply very too thin or made out of these new oxo-degradable materials that simply can't be recycled either. And so they end up not getting recycled. And this happens to far too many, like this happens to about 90% of plastic. So it doesn't say if 90% of plastics can't be recycled, then why are we still saying plastics can be recycled? Maybe that's kind of the exception rather than the norm.
So, in short, some of these materials technically could be recycled under ideal conditions, but those conditions just don't match up with the way that they are actually used in the world. And so it just becomes non-economically viable to recycle them. They end up in the environment.
They certainly don't match up with the way that they're being used
Mhm.
for single-use purposes.
So let's return to some of the solutions. Tell us a bit about what your organization has been doing to address this problem, both in terms of your individual interventions through actions like the plastic bag robbery and some of the national and municipal level legislation that you've been fielding.
Yeah. So I'd like to give you a little bit of an insight into our strategy, and I haven't really talked about this much, but when we started a little in the middle of all this work, I started thinking of how industry, interest groups and industries will have access to lobbying firms to help them, change policies, to help them gain access to the government. And I thought, well, that's very convenient. You have the money to hire good lobby firms with good connections in the government, and they have the skill set um, to make the changes that you feel are profitable to your industry. Um, why don't nonprofits have a similar benefit? So I try to strategize a little bit around it and kind of turn our organization into a lobbying group of sorts. And so the strategy that we used was um, both a PR strategy and a technical policy change strategy. So what you see in the trailer to the story of plastic is plastic bag robbery, and that's part of the PR strategy, right? That's part of us putting ourselves out there with an image of an organization that's focused on campaigns, that's focused on getting the people aware and educated about the issue. And it's kind of fun, it's light, it's meant to be catchy, and it's meant to garner a lot of public participation and volunteers. Behind the scenes, we work with the government, and um, we actually have sometimes we actually even have contractual relationships with the government where they hire us to be consultants to help them craft policies, starting from the academic papers and then the draft regulations and then the type of public consultations and procedures that you have to follow in order to make sure it's legitimate. And it's a very professional, very, very tedious day-by-day work. That's not very exciting, to be publicized, but it's one of the most important aspects. So these things have to go hand in hand, because when you're talking to the government, they're quite comfortable, issuing any regulation as long as they think that there's public support. So we have to create that public support, and we have to show that the public support is massive enough for the policy to be popular when it's enacted. So that's why we have to kind of be like a double agent. We work from inside and work from outside to create the enabling conditions and create the the basis for policies from the inside. Yeah.
That's a great point, that we have to shift the culture in terms of how people think about and interact with materials like plastic. And then we have to change the system under which we're all operating, and that those two things really have to go hand in hand. So I think the plastic bag robbery and all the work happening behind the scenes is a perfect example of how we can make change around the plastic issue at scale. Now, you say in the video that we recently released under the title of The Plastic Bag Diet through the Story of Stuff project, that it's not the people in rural areas that are uneducated and unwilling to handle this material or stop using it. It's the multinational corporations that are not letting them become educated about these issues. So talk a little bit about how big multinational corporations try to shift responsibility for plastic pollution onto individuals, and what does it look like to start holding them accountable?
Well, first of all, the multinational industries, and I'm talking FMCG as well as producers as well as.
And that's fast-moving consumer goods companies.
Yes, fast-moving consumer goods companies. They have different standards wherever they go. When one country says you can't use sachets, they're fine with it. Okay, we won't use sachets. Okay, we won't use microbeads. But when another country doesn't have the same regulation, they don't care. I mean, they're going to market goods where they're going to market packaging where they think that kind of packaging will be catchy to the segment, to the market that they're trying to target. And so, number one, that doesn't show that they're in tune to whether or not that market has the capacity to manage the packaging waste. So they're only thinking of how to market the packaging, how the packaging can be catchy enough for that market, but they're not thinking of how the packaging can be actually managed in that market. So the second thing is that there's a lot of over the past 2 years, when we've become really kind of gaining momentum with the regulations, they have been pushing out this, interest groups have been pushing out this narrative that it's not the plastic that's the problem. Don't make enemies of the plastic. It's the management that's the problem. And so you don't need to ban plastics. You don't need to put a tax on plastics. All you need to do is make sure that the plastic collection, the waste collection, is improved, and then you're done. You're set. And that's a very false narrative, because again, they're pushing responsibility to somebody else when they're saying improve plastic collection. Who are they saying should be collecting the plastic? They're saying that the government should be collecting the plastic. And then they're saying we have to educate society. The solution is not banning. We have to educate the society to not throw garbage where they shouldn't throw garbage, to not litter in the rivers, to not litter in the seas. Again, they're pushing the problem to people. They're saying it's the people's fault that they're littering where they shouldn't, which is, again, not the problem, because some people actually care and understand, except that even if they littered in the right place, it goes to a landfill somewhere, and it probably isn't correct landfill, and the landfill doesn't know what to do with it anyway because they can't recycle it. So these are false narratives, and it's simply pushing the responsibility elsewhere, where they actually should be thinking about how they could be redesigning the packaging, how they could actually make do without producing certain types of plastic that they know have low recyclability value. They're not starting to do that yet.
Wow, that was really great. And there's so much important info in everything you just said. So let me just break it down and you can tell me if I'm getting this right. So large multinational corporations, many of them based in the global north, in the EU, in the US, are selling these low value plastics and packaging and single-use disposable plastics into these developing markets. They're pocketing the profit and they know full well that these products are largely going to end up in the environment. But when that happens, they say, well, it's not our fault. It's the responsibility of the local governments to pay for the waste collection. And of course, the government's money is really the people's money. So at the end of the day, you've got big corporations pocketing the profit, and they're leaving us all to clean up the mess.
Exactly. Beautifully said.
So you touched on a couple of the aspects of the solution. We've talked a bit about national and municipal legislation to crack down on these problematic packages. And then you also talked a bit about getting companies to redesign these problematic materials. Are there any other aspects of the solution that we should be looking at?
There are so many aspects of the solution. What we're focusing on is reducing, obviously, right? I think that it can't be stressed enough how reduce, reuse, recycle ends up today mostly being focused on recycling. Because let's face it, recycling is sexy. Recycling involves technology. Recycling creates a new product. A new product means something that you can sell. Something you can sell means that, oh, we can appeal to a consumer base. You know, it's all part of having a commercial value out of something. And that's very, very trendy. But the thing is that that makes people forget that the fundamental step before you go to reduce and before you go to reuse and recycle is reduce. And I can't even begin to explain how frustrated I am that so few people understand this, and that they actually think that recycling is part of reducing. So I get questions from media who are asking, you know, what do you think about these sachets that can be turned into bags, for example? That's part of reduction. You know, how effective is that in reducing waste? And I have to first explain that is not reduction of waste. That's recycling. And so very few people understand what reduce means. And I think we need, you know, that's why our campaign mostly focus on all the various ways that you could actually make reduce happen, not just through banning, but also through proper waste separation at the source, you know, composting at home. So we partner with, you know, zero waste influencers to show society how, you know, what reduction really looks like on a day-to-day level.
That's great. You know, so much we think of reduce, reuse, recycle as being a mandate for individuals, but of course it's also on corporations to reduce the amount of plastic that they're putting out into the economy, recognizing that much of that plastic will end up in the environment. So responsibility there really needs to be shared.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point that you bring up, because again, people don't usually think of industries when they're talking about reduction initiatives. Mostly what they see are influencers, you know, Instagram influencers who are you know, incorporating a zero waste lifestyle and think, wow, that's pretty difficult, you know, but that's cool. It's nice that somebody's doing it. And really, that's one way of doing it, but also corporations need to be responsible. And part of being responsible to reduce is to redesign, fundamentally overhaul the entire design of their packaging, to make sure that none of it ends up being residue.
Absolutely. I also want to call out just one more word that we've been using here, and that's sachets. And I realize that not everyone is familiar with what that product category or that packaging category is. So sachets, actually, could you maybe define those for us?
Yeah, it's very tiny packets of, you might find them in a tomato ketchup or chili packages that are very tiny. In developing countries, you know, shampoos go into them, soap goes into them, you know, sugar, you know, and tomato ketchup and chili, and you know, all sorts of things go into them, and they're sold usually for a lower middle class segment, with the gimmick that you know, if you can only make enough to get by on a daily basis, then this is the day-to-day item. This is the kind of the the daily portion that you can buy. It's absolutely marketed as single use, both the packaging and the content, and it's impossible to recycle because it's made of multi-layer packaging. The inside is a type of foil, the outside is a type of plastic, and then there's another layer that's of plastic that's filled that's for the branding. And it's all stuck together. So once it becomes waste, there's no way to unstick it. And as we know, if you want to recycle something, you have to make sure that all the categories of materials in that one item are separated, right? And because there's no way to separate it and it's too small, it's just simply unrecyclable. It becomes residue. So it's a huge problem in developing countries.
Yeah, I think sachets are a really great example of that point that we talked about earlier, that not all plastics are created equal. And then furthermore, that companies will distribute different types of plastic into different markets. So here in the US, for example, we might purchase shampoo that will last for months in a very recyclable HDPE, hard plastic bottle. In the developing world, you're much likely to consume products like shampoo in single-serving, multi-layer packaging that just can't be recycled and ultimately generates a much higher volume of plastic. So this really demonstrates how this problem doesn't look the same all around the world. And in the developing world, where we have easy access to fairly robust recycling systems and a higher volume of high-value recyclable plastics, we have a very different perspective on this issue and maybe a limited view of what plastic and its consequences look like for many more people around the world, where it seems like what we saw in the video in the Chilewang River are much more common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not that developed countries don't have a problem with multi-layer packaging either.
Great point, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'd love to open it up for questions in just a few minutes. I see we have only 10 viewers, but if any of you do have questions, we'd love to hear them from you. And of course, these videos and recordings will stay online afterwards, so many more people will have the chance to view these conversations. And this is a great opportunity to step up and ask a question that other people may have as well. But before we do that, well, I give you all just a minute to type out your questions if you have any. Tiza, I'd love to invite you to share some final thoughts. Anything that you'd like to share that we didn't have the chance to talk about here? And where can people connect with you and support your work online?
You're kind of breaking up though. I hope you can still hear me.
Yep, still have you.
Yeah, okay.
So that was any final thoughts from you, Tiza, stuff we didn't talk about that you'd like to get across, and where can people find you and support your work online?
Well, I'm based in Indonesia, so anytime anybody's in Indonesia, come find me. We'll have a good chat, and I'll take you on the Ciliwung River ride, which is a very exciting ride. We have a website, dietkantongplastik.info, and we're trying to translate it so that it's bilingual. We're getting there. But shoot me an email, and I'm open for collaborations because it's been important to get a global view of the plastic waste problem. Indonesia is one of the countries that have still not banned plastic imports, plastic waste imports, and there have been some voices. So just to give a background, I'm sure most people know, after China banned waste imports, Indonesia was one of the countries that said that's an opportunity for us to get that waste and get the money out of recycling that waste. And that's just a completely disastrous idea. And we've actually seen some of the evidence of, American food products and multi-layer packaging from Trader Joe's, which we don't have in Indonesia, from British supermarkets that ended up in one of our landfills, and it's simply unrecyclable, so it's just sitting there right now. So it's a global problem. There's a slightly different slightly different solutions, slightly different management systems in every country between developed and developing countries, but also developed countries don't really have an answer either, since they've usually exported the waste and now they can't. So, you know, we really need to collaborate across North-South countries to find the solutions together.
Well, it's a great point about the global nature of this system and of this problem. And that's why it's great that there's a global movement that's working to solve this issue together. And that's the Break Free from Plastic movement, of which I know you've been a real important part of the conversation. So if folks would like to learn a little bit more about that unified global strategy to solve plastic pollution and to find an organization working in your area that you can plug into, plus all sorts of great educational and action resources, we would love for you to check out breakfreefromplastic.org. Or look up the hashtag #BreakFreeFromPlastic on social media, and I'm sure you can connect with some of the content there. And of course, check out the Story of Stuff project, where you can view the newest mini doc leading up to the feature-length documentary, The Story of Plastic, featuring Tiza, where you can hear more from her and see some of those images from the Chilewang River. I see we have a couple questions coming in here. I know you just have a few more minutes. We do have to have a hard stop in just a couple moments, as I know you have another meeting to get to. But I see that Raki or Reiki asks if after the plastic bag robberies, where you take people's single-use plastic bags and hand them a free reusable plastic bag, if you do any follow-up studies to see if people are continuing to use them.
We haven't yet. We haven't yet done a follow-up study, but we do surveys periodically to see whether people are engaged in bringing their own reusable bags to the supermarket. So not exactly the people who we've engaged with at the plastic bag robberies, but just people throughout the city in general. And the trend is increasing, really. People are more aware and people are more willing to use reusable bags to go to the supermarket, especially that the momentum keeps building. Another new city keeps banning plastic bags, it seems. Now every month there's a new city announcing a plastic bag ban. So awareness is building, but until that hard shove comes in, which is that, you know, there's a policy that actually forces them to bring their reusable bags, I think a lot of people will just tend to forget and leave it at home.
Absolutely. And I think this will have to be the last question here before we sign you off, but this is a really great question also coming from Raki or Reiki. And that's if you can talk a little bit about what the alternative to sachets are, because as you noted, for people in developing countries, sometimes that's the only way they can afford a particular product, is to buy it one serving at a time.
Sure, they can't buy bulk. Bulk would be too expensive, right? So they probably couldn't buy like big jugs of shampoo or soap. But you know, in the past there were bulk stores. Maybe bulk stores are something new in the US, but in Indonesia that used to be kind of a tradition where people would just come to the local market and somebody would have these soaps that are made out of organic, you know, materials, out of, you know, flowers, natural perfumes, and they would just sell it wrapped in paper. Or shampoo, they would just bring their own bottle. They could bring their own bottle and just have a refill station at the market. It's completely doable, and it's also very affordable. So these kinds of solutions have been kind of overlooked so far.
Well, that's great. Well, Tiza, I know you need to jump off. Thank you so much for sharing your time this morning and for all the great work that you do, and for being such an important leader in this movement to solve plastic pollution. I'm going to stay on this broadcast, answer a couple more questions that I've seen come in. But thank you again, Tiza. I know that everyone's really enjoyed hearing from you. We really appreciate you sharing your time.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
All right. So I'm going to stay here and answer just a couple more questions that just came in. A couple people have asked for Tiza's email. Tony and Raki, I think the best option there is to go ahead and email us at info@storyofstuff.org. We'd be happy to forward your inquiry to Tiza or put you in touch. Sophia asks, is this related to the Story of Stuff, Annie Leonard's book? Yes, so I am the community engagement manager at the Story of Stuff project. We remain an active organization working on issues related to the take, make, waste economy. So that's all the stuff in our consumer economy, where it comes from, where it goes, and how it's impacting people on the planet in every step of the way. In addition to Annie's book, The Story of Stuff, there's a great video by that same title, The Story of Stuff. And we continue to put out content around a variety of environmental issues with a real focus these days on plastic pollution and some of the topics that you've heard us talking about. So certainly visit our website, storyofstuff.org, or find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram in order to learn more about our work. And in terms of what steps we would recommend to take action on these issues, certainly personally avoiding plastic and reducing the plastic that you use, as Tisa indicated, is a really great place to stop. But of course, those individual actions are a really poor place to, great place to start rather, but a poor place to stop. We need to change the system so that doing the right thing is the easy thing instead of the hard thing like it is now. So again, if you can visit the Story of Stuff, storyofstuff.org, or the website for our upcoming documentary, storyofplastic.org, sign up to our email list. We're currently fielding a number of campaigns addressing these issues. And we're also constantly putting out more great content like this webinar and the last mini documentary featuring Tisa, where you can continue to learn more about these issues and take action with the change makers that are working to solve them. So if I don't see any more questions coming in here, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But thank you all for joining us today and for being part of this important work. Have a nice night, everyone.